So, we got a lot to talk about with the PvP update today. Let's get right into it with the rework of Colossal Pokes. Patch 1.07's mix of upwards and downwards adjustments to Colossal Swords were certainly welcomed, but ultimately removed what was a fundamental strength of the weapon: its fast rolling attack. To many, it was a necessary evil to restrict the attack's game-breaking strengths when repeatedly used from a crouching state, but they didn't necessarily need to nerf the speed itself to balance the weapon, and with this patch, we can see that the developers now agree. My original suggestions were to thin the hitbox, limit the tracking in the same way Dark Souls 3 did with it and other quick thrusting attacks, and to lower its recovery into a subsequent crouch. But with this update, they seem to have one-upped our suggestions by instead making the huge change of adding the ability to make changes between crouching attacks and rolling attacks. They still use the same animation, but in special cases like this, the developers can choose to make key differences for PvP balance reasons. Now, Colossal users will have a moderately fast poke available in their kit, but one that they'll have to use far more strategically to leverage its strengths while not falling into the pitfalls of its weaknesses, that of the thin hitboxes and spear-like tracking we suggested. The same can be said with the rolling attack in a different way. It's far faster and doesn't have the same type of limited tracking, but the fact that it's locked behind dodging acts as its own balancing factor on the attack. Another way this and other strong crouching attacks have been further balanced is the patching of a highly problematic bug that's been here since the day of release. Basically, when entering or exiting a crouch while sprinting, stamina was not consumed at all, and in fact regenerated at full speed. Now, weapons with strong crouch attacks will no longer be most optimal when used to Goblin Step or Wave Dash between pokes to have literally unlimited sprint speed attack pressure with no walking breaks in between. Players will have to use the crouch state and the attacks it offers more thoughtfully so they don't end up like a sitting duck, unable to space out their opponent's attacks, or unable to quickly close the gap with the opponent to punish or pressure them. With this, I think we can expect a downtuning of other problematic crouching attacks, and an uptuning of various rolling and crouching attacks that haven't seen much use. Okay, but is it only the Colossal Poke that got adjusted in this update? Nope. In fact, they did similar adjustments for crouching pokes on thrusting swords and heavy thrusting swords. The crouching attacks on thrusting swords were slowed down by 28%, and the heavy thrusting swords 8%. I'd say I'm more critical of these changes, however, I'd say we should cut them some slack, as they're certainly only testing the water as far as these crouching versus rolling attack differences go. But it's still important to make these criticisms so they can eventually adjust them for the better. First, let's start off with the heavy thrusting sword's crouch attack. This thrust was already pretty weak relative to the weapon's other options, as you can see from how the attack doesn't do a forward thrust, but an upwards one. So this nerf may have been a bit unnecessary, albeit rather inconsequential as it just was one frame. Plus, the heavy thrusting sword already has numerous other attacks in its kit that are far stronger anyway, which certainly still could be used in combination with the crouching attack. Second, being that the normal thrusting swords and crouching attacks got slowed down severely, but didn't have their core issues of hitbox size and excessive tracking solved. If it weren't for the nerfs to the player counter hit damage and thrusting sword poise damage, this weapon would have stayed basically as strong as it was before. And it still basically is. Even if this weapon didn't break poise at all, it would still trivialize numerous weapons in 1v1s with how overtuned its hitboxes, hit detection, range, recovery speeds, and damage are. I'm not saying they need to nerf it into the ground, but it needs to have its fair share of weaknesses alongside other content in the game being buffed to meet it. I'll lay out my current suggestions for the thrusting sword now, just so the devs have something to work with. Adjust the tracking window to end 2 frames before the hitbox is enabled, so the game has time to snap the character's facing direction and doesn't hit enemies in horizontal swipes like it currently can and does. This is what you already did in an update for Dark Souls 3, as it previously had that problem, so I think it's safe to say that this is a fair adjustment. Since thrusting swords are relatively longer than most other light weapons in the game, it also would be fair to thin their hitboxes on the light and rolling attacks. I'd leave it up to the devs to determine how much, but ideally playtesting should find that in an active battle, the light attacks are prone to missing in a similar fashion to how the light attacks of the heavy thrusting sword does. That is, due to circumstantial horizontal movement or hard strafing. Lastly, the cancel into dodge weapon arts on the thrusting sword attacks should only be as fast as the weapon's cancel speed into rolling. Currently, dodge weapon arts use a fast cancel window for weapon skills instead of the actual event for dodging. This creates an issue where attack skill combos would be indirectly nerfed by trying to fix this instant recovery issue. so I recommend the devs look into adjusting these skills to use the dodge window instead. If that is not possible at the moment, I would simply recommend pulling back the fast cancel weapon skill window to be just as fast as the dodge cancel on any of the thrusting sword's attacks. Alright, with that out of the way, I'd like to talk about a move that definitely needs to take advantage of this crouching versus rolling attack distinction. That is, the paired Great Spear rolling attack. This attack is very strong due to stacking many of the right advantages that pre-patch 1.07 Colossal Crouch Poke had. It's a very fast attack that is guaranteed to poise break, outtrades most players' attack options, especially on counter hit, can't be strafed, has decent range, and chains extremely well into itself. Thankfully, the code for separating crouching and rolling attacks also seems to be in place for paired attacks, so with a hotfix, they could easily implement similar changes to what they did with the Colossal Sword this patch. However, it's important that they don't do these same exact changes as to over-nerf it, and make Power Stance Great Spears a pure jumping attack machine. This crouching attack has some key and contextual differences from the original Colossal Poke that change how it should be nerfed. First, while the speed is strong, it comes with the downside of limited range and a fair amount of recovery, allowing for some attacks to easily space and punish it. Its hitboxes are also not nearly as meaty as the original Colossal Poke, meaning it's far more vulnerable to jump attacks. Third, in rare cases, players can passively poise the attack if they're hit by only one of the lances on the lower side of it. This is rather rare due to its high tracking and mostly overlapping hitboxes, but if that was nerfed, you could easily see this happening more, like it already does with the standing attack. Fourth, its damage was just nerfed by the thrust counter hit nerf, and may be soon lowered more if a much needed nerf to overall power stance damage comes in. Oh, and of course, due to the removal of the stamina regeneration glitch, its high stamina consumption actually holds it back now. With all this said, I'd simply suggest the developers give the attack spear-like tracking on the crouching variant without touching the speed or anything else moveset-wise. With that, a damage nerf to power stance movesets would be a-okay as well. It would also open up possible buffs to certain undertuned power stance moves, like the dual Great Spear standing attacks, or halberd power stance attacks. Lastly, it's important to bring awareness to a glitch that needs to be hotfixed as soon as possible. Not all weapons have animation dataset for the crouch attack variant, which would mean the game would have to have some code in place to use the rolling variant if that data is not present, which is exactly what it does. However, unfortunately, it seems there's a way to bug this out by simply equipping an offhand weapon that does have a distinctive crouch variant defined internally. This causes the game to try and play the crouch variant on these weapons that don't support it, so it uses the registered default for the crouch attack ID, which is that of the straight sword. Which leads to obviously catastrophic imbalance, as it basically gives you the ability to craft an ascended version of the Dark Souls 3 Murky Hand sight.
Murky's 16.
Beyond the recording of this video for demonstration purposes and maybe private sessions, I probably won't be abusing this bug anymore, and I recommend you don't either. It might be amusing for the first time, but truly it just breaks the game and makes using anything else virtually unplayable. That said, it's your own choice to make, even if I think it's certainly wrong. Alright, I think that's enough said regarding crouching. However, there's still so much more I could go into in regards to the amazing changes in this patch. Since the video is getting long enough, and I want to keep you guys in the know, we're going to end the video here, and I'm going to continue with other patch 1.08 changes and additional videos in the coming days. Subscribe with notifications if you want to keep up with it, follow my Twitter for some extra content and discussions, join the community Discord to ask me any questions, and subscribe to my Patreon if you would like to join the lovely people on screen.